Okay. Our first question, our hospital is going to give us a large amount of money, which is a great thing. If we deposit this money to the general fund, will the 10% limit prevent us from transferring this to the rainy day fund? We have a little preamble. Without knowing the whole reason that the hospital is giving the county a large amount of money, it's not really possible to address everything in this. With that being said, if we assume there's no statutory requirement, current local ordinance governing the funds, and assuming the hospital's not putting any restrictions on those funds, the following positions would be applicable. If the funds are deposited to the general fund, the 10% limit would apply. If, however, the board amends the rainy day fund to include these revenues, the proceeds could be deposited directly to the rainy day fund. The authority for this position can be found in Indiana Code 36-1-8.5.1. The rainy day fund does, statute does say in that the sources for the funding of the rainy day fund, which may include the following, does include anything specified in the ordinance or resolution adopted under this section and not otherwise prohibited by law. A city or town water utility has certified delinquent fees and penalties for collection to the county auditor. This is the first time the fees and penalties have been certified to the county auditor, and we're not sure how to handle this. We looked, and we didn't have access to everything, but we could not find any authority to treat this water penalties the same way you would a sewer lien, to certify it to the auditor. However, we will do further research and talk with our directors over the cities and towns and have an answer for you in the bulletin. Our commissioners used to look at all of the accounts payable vouchers before approving them. The commissioners do not do this anymore. They think it is the auditor's job to make sure every claim has no issues to be addressed and approve them on that basis. Is this common practice? Should it be addressed? If so, what suggestions do you have to help approach it the right way? The statute does require that the payment of the claim is allowed by the governmental entity, legislative body, or the commissioners. It does not prescribe the manner that the claim is allowed by that governing board. It's not uncommon for the governing board to review claims on a claims docket presented for approval, and it is really up to them how much risk they are willing to take in looking at the claims docket instead of the entire accounts payable voucher. Maybe in this case, if the auditor should voice their concerns about the inherent risk the commissioners are taking when they only look at the claims docket and not the entire voucher. Hopefully in this type of communication, both the auditor and the commissioner can develop a plan for the type of claims they would like brought to their attention. There might be a particular type of claim that they want to review, such as a large disbursement, a current project, something they've had problems with, employee reimbursements or credit card claims. Or anything not usual to them. But if you open the discussion, you might want to approach it as a general discussion on the county's internal controls over accounts payable process and what your concerns are and what their concerns are. Is it correct to post the jurors' pay from personal services, or should it be paid from contractual services? Also, what about the interpreter's pay? Should this be paid from contractual services or personal services? You would need to post the disbursements to the line item that you have budgeted for payment of those services. If the interpreter is under contract for services, it would be appropriate to budget and pay from contracted services. There is additional guidance provided in the Chapter 6 of the manual on accounts payable. Also on payroll, this would not be considered a payroll item. It does allow, or in the manual, it does talk about the following expenses: mileage and travel expenses, per diem of jurors, compensation of pauper attorneys or employee of the court, witness fees, compensation of precinct election boards, payments to attorneys, engineers, and other professional persons, when serving on a contractual basis. All of those items, as well as some other items, are not payroll items, which is what you really think of in personal services. They should be paid on regular county warrants and not on payroll warrants, but they could be classified under personal services if that's where you've put your appropriation. How do we handle a situation where a sewer lien has been filed and certified to the county auditor, but the property owner has been paying the town directly? The property was up for tax sale, but was removed when notified of the payments to the town. How do we remove the sewer lien? The Indiana Code 36-9-23-33 deals with the proper process for handling these sewer liens. The town is obviously out of compliance. The town should not have accepted any payments once that lien had been recorded and certified to the county auditor. Statutorily, the amounts that are shown on the tax duplicate are still owed to the county, even though the town is holding on to them. If the town provides the funds paid by the property owner, that amount could be shown as paid. However, the amount owed for the certification fee and any costs associated with the tax sale would still need to be paid. With that being said, we would not take audit exception if the county used a certification of error to remove the principal payment, as long as there is adequate documentation that the amount owed by the property owner was paid to the town and the amount removed from the tax duplicate. And the amount is not material. The county would still need to collect any unpaid county costs due and owed to the county, and may need to work with the county attorney in recovering those costs. Are we allowed to void checks which are in error? During a recent audit, we were told we could never void a check. Unless you never make a mistake, you're going to have voided checks. And your printer never makes a mistake, and your software never makes a mistake. Voided checks are allowed. They should be marked as void, and they should be retained for documentation, both the original and the duplicate, if you're doing duplicate checks. They should be accounted for in your software in the way that your software is set up to account for them, so that you can show that those checks were issued and then voided properly. I'm not sure why you were told you can't void a check. Okay, if who's on first and what's on second, who's on third? No, first. Just reading them off. Now, I'm not doing the whole Abbott and Costello routine. That's about as good as I can do. Can the annual financial report filed on Gateway be resubmitted to correct errors so that beginning balances will be correct for the next year? Yes. Currently, errors on the financial report can be corrected. The annual financial report can be resubmitted on Gateway so that beginning balances will be correct. However, do remember, if you upload your financial information from your software, all of the beginning balances will be overwritten by your upload anyway. It is also important to note that starting next year, the ability to change the annual financial report after an audit will be severely limited, and there will be more information coming out on that. Our council and commissioners are not currently covered by our health care plan. Can a commissioner be added to the plan and reimburse the county for the employer and employee cost of the premium? The county attorney should be consulted regarding the legal ramifications and requirements under the Affordable Care Act and the definition of covered employees within the county's plan. The county's plan will also specify how the premiums are to be paid. Is it still required for the township trustee to give a copy of their annual report to the county auditors since it is now on Gateway? And if so, how long must the auditor keep the reports? Part 1, yes. Indiana Code 36-6-4-12, subsection D states, 10 days after the legislative body's action under Indiana Code 36-6-9, the executive shall file a copy of the report and its accompanying vouchers as adopted by the legislative body in the county auditor's office. The legislative body may, for the benefit of the township, bring a civil action against the executive if the executive fails to file the report within 10 days after the legislative body's action. There's a little bit more. This code section has not been amended since the implementation of Gateway, so it still stands. For the second part of the question, the county auditor would need to retain the township's annual report until it is disposed of through the appropriate destruction of public records procedures through the county clerk. May the county commissioners mandate the outsourcing of payroll to a payroll service such as ADP? A county may contract with a payroll service. That is allowable. If there is a conflict about what roles county officials play in determining who has ultimate responsibility over the contract, you need to contact your county attorney. And please bear in mind when you're having these discussions, having a payroll service does not eliminate the auditor's responsibility for overseeing the payroll, determining that payroll amounts are correct and posted properly, and that all payroll withholdings are properly recorded and remitted. It doesn't just move it out completely. It's another service that you can use. Is the disabled vet form 128 still available? We were told not to use old forms, but there is no option until a new form is done. Yes, the 128 is available and should be used when the applicant owns property to which a property tax deduction may be applied under Indiana Code 6-1.1-12-13, 14, or 16. If no property is owned, the county auditor's affidavit should be used. Affidavit for veterans who don't own property for their excise credit has to be notarized with the auditor's signature. Can it be done by a deputy auditor? The auditor is not always available. Regarding veterans' deductions, Indiana Code 6-6.5-5.2 subpart F states in part, an individual claiming the credit must attach to the form an affidavit from the county auditor stating that the claimant does not own property to which a property tax deduction may be applied under Indiana Code 6-1.1-12-13, 14, or 16. Indiana Code 36-2-16-3 states, Section A, a deputy appointed under this chapter may perform all of the official duties of the officer who appointed him and is subject to the same regulations and penalties as the officer. And under B, the officer appointing the deputy is responsible for all the official acts of their deputy. And my final one, you'll be glad to know, should the treasurer have access to the FTP site? Ours refuses to. Okay. Yes, the treasurer should have access to the FTP site. I know there are limited access available, but it was designed so both the auditor's office and the treasurer's office both have access to the site. They both need to get access to those reports in order to properly do their job. For the treasurer, they need to have access to that deposit report, that one report each day. It is the source documentation for the treasurer to post excise tax from the BMV. We will take audit exception to the treasurer posting the cash book based on the bank statements only and not using those deposit reports from BMV. If the treasurer refuses to access the site and arrangements are agreed upon between the two offices, the auditor's office could print off the daily deposit report and provide them to the treasurer's office. As we pointed out in the excise tax presentation on Tuesday, it will be easier to determine the variance between the auditor's excise ledger and the cash book if you have kept those off those deposit reports and the treasurer's records include, the receipts include the report number and the transaction date. Since the auditor posts on the transaction date, the treasurer posts on the deposit date, and there are 14 days difference. So you can help line your records up and figure out exactly where the difference comes from. Yes? They need to contact Tamitha that day. I did go over and spend about an hour with her, and I talked to her. That deposit report is she makes that day from the state, and it should be what is moved from the state's account to your account. If it's not right, she needs to know that.
Yeah, we do realize that. My question is, what do you think that the treasurer should do? Should they hold on
they should post off the deposit report. The variance would be a reconciling item until they determine any correct adjustments that need to be made. It's the same thing as if you got an ACH and what the deposit wasn't the same. It'd be the same thing if you're looking at your bank statement and you actually made the deposit and the bank didn't. You want to find out, did the bank make a mistake? Did you have a mistake on yours? But you're going to post from that deposit report because that's what BMV is saying is owed your county. And so that's what should be on the cash book. That's what you should have received. Uh-huh.
How long should we wait to get this correction? Because we've got one from early August and we can't even do our tax cut. And I've been calling.
I know right now they have gotten behind because they have other issues they're dealing with. When I talked to her, it was before that, and she said they are usually better at doing it in a yes. Yeah. Is it a material amount? I mean, it's a reconciling item. Yeah, it's just a reconciling item you just have to carry forward and settle on what?
On the actual cash. The report's incorrect. The cash is correct. The report is incorrect.
Yes, and you're gonna certify what you've received, and they're gonna have to reconcile what unless they can, let you get from them where that $16 goes, which taxing unit gets it.
From the BMV.
Yes.
That's no problem.
Right.
Like, how long should you wait?
That means they've got. I understand that you want it all nice and clean and everything, and sometimes it just doesn't happen in a timely manner. I will have to say if that the issue is ongoing, I know you might have to go through settlement, and if there's reconciling settlement issues, if I'm recalling correctly, there is something on settlement that you can take care of that at a later date on your next settlement. But having said that, how long do you go through this? If there is a continuing issue on this, first I know that Tamith will want to know this and try to rectify it. But if it gets to a point where we're talking a year or something like that, then you can always talk to us too, and we will talk with BMV to see what the issue is, because there might be a larger underlying issue. And then based on that, we can give you advice on what needs to happen. Right now, I don't think that we've gone into that long of a time period. So, but I do appreciate that you just want to get it cleaned up, because none of us like to have those things, especially $16, just hanging there. So if, come February, January, something like that, it's still an issue, before the next settlement time period, get in touch with us and we'll work with BMV and try to get it figured out, okay? Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Lori. I want you to know, she came, was it late July, something like that, 1st of July. We were going through so much in the summer, and I was so grateful when she showed up. She has been my right hand, and she is just really adapting, and I think that you will all really, really enjoy working with her. And she's been such a great help for this conference. So I want to say thank you to Lori personally. And I also want to say thank you to Fred. Fred wanted to come here. That just shows already his enthusiasm for his job. He's like, I'd like to just participate and hear of the questions and the answers. And they might not be directly related to the auditor's office, but he wanted to know just in general what kind of questions that you have, what kind of responses we gave. And so again, I'm really looking forward to working with Fred. I love that kind of enthusiasm, and I'm sure that you appreciate that also. Okay. If we pay a claim out of a fund line and then have a refund reimbursement due to an error or refund, maybe someone failed to attend a meeting and fees were refunded, can that be credited back to that funds line, or does it have to be done through an additional? The answer is easy if it was truly an error or an excessive payment, because that can be, if it's within the same budgeted year, that can be just put right back into the line. But then that threw me when somebody says maybe someone failed to attend a meeting, because then that to me is not a payment that was made in error or an excessive payment. What that was a legitimate expenditure, and you were very fortunate that whoever failed to go, and I'm sure it was a good reason, but that wherever they were going to go was going to repay that registration fee. So that money just goes right back in and is subject to appropriation. So that's the key, is to think, is it an error? Say like you have a utility bill that was owing for $50 and you paid $500. That's an error and that's excessive. And so that money, when you get it returned back, would just go back into that line item. So that's kind of the way you need to think about that. Oh, yes? I mean, I'm again going to think of it, was it purchased in error? And that's what we would ask you if we were auditing you. We'd be like, was that purchased in error? Was that payment actually an error? Versus, was it something that you're like, we didn't need that, that's not what we expected, that's not what we wanted you to do, okay? You have to, the law is very specific in saying error or excessive. And so I think that you would have maybe a hard time because that person didn't go out and purchase it in error. But if you could show that, you know, maybe there was an error involved, that we wouldn't take exception to that, okay? And materiality is going to play a part. We know that too. So you have to think in some of those terms also. Yes?
What if the expense was paid out of the code? Can we still receive it back into that line item? Because we have some expenses coming out of code, not general fund.
Right. This would be applicable to any fund, that if there's an error or excessive, that you would put it back into the line item, if it meets those definitions. Okay? Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah.
I was always told the only time that you would ever put money back into a line item is if it were a reasonable.
Well, there is that, and that is correct, that you've got so many months that if there's a repayment for something that was insured and you're going to use it for that replacement, that yes, you can do that. But the statute, and I should have probably gone ahead and given you that statute, but I didn't, is under IC 6-1.1 18-9 that talks about excessive or error in payment. So that is statutorily allowed. But that's why I said you've got to be really careful that it truly is an error in excess. No. Okay. Okay, and you're not talking, are you talking incentive? I mean, what monies, which fund? Are we just talking about regular reimbursement? There wasn't something that went through the incentive monies? Oh, okay. Well, you can always show him our manual. It's in chapter 8, where we talk about that if it's reimbursement for a grant, that it does have to be appropriated again. If you want to send me an email, I will be happy to stick my neck out on that chopping block. You know, I don't have to live with the judge, you do. Ultimately, if a judge gives you a court order or something like that, hey, you know, but we can go against that judge. And we have gone against judges when they have not followed the proper process for court orders. So that's, you know, that can happen. But usually I'm finding, with the exception, and I'm sure you'll be able to tell me exceptions, that judges will be reasonable if you give them the authoritative source. So. Any other questions? Are the salary ordinances, usually done at budget time, still required? Yes. Is there a rumor out there that we don't have to have salary ordinance? I know that they can be difficult and that trying to figure out the best way to do a salary ordinance can be a challenge. And so I'll give you maybe some help there. If you look in, let's see, the July 2013 bulletin, page 7, it talks about the different ways that a salary ordinance can be done, because we find sometimes that there's issues at the end of the year if you try to just divide up an annual amount. So you might want to take a look at that. The actual statute that's still in effect is IC 36-2-5-3A. You'd have a lot of disappointed auditors because we do use that salary ordinance when we're looking at payroll. So maybe you want to disappoint us. That's okay. In regards to the Recorder's Perpetuation Fund, would travel to out-of-state conferences be an eligible expense for preservation of records? Well, this is not something that you would typically think of. However, IC 36-2-7-10D states in part, the county recorder may use any money in this fund without appropriation for the preservation of records and the improvement of record-keeping systems and equipment. So the one thing that came up that would be allowable is if there's a conference relating to the preservation of records, maybe some software training or something like that that was out of state. But it would have to be shown to us that it directly related to the preservation, not some esoteric, in order to preserve records, I need a nice, relaxing trip type thing. So. Oh, this is like my favorite question, and I kind of could read it two different ways. I know, like the who's on first and second, that was an actual question. I mean, Lori wasn't even, she was amusing, but she wasn't trying to be. And this one, we were just chuckling. We were tired last night, but we chuckled on this one. The commissioners have established an employee dress code. Can I be reimbursed for fishnet stockings and Victoria's Secret? You could, that we definitely got our chuckle, and then we were like, well, okay, we were trying to figure out, is that the new dress code? Which I think there's other issues involved, but or have you been dressing that way and it's no longer allowed and you want to get paid for that? So you take your pick there. When a bidder is not awarded, are we supposed to return their bid bond to them immediately? Yes, under IC 36-1-12-4.5C, it states all checks of unsuccessful bidders shall be returned to them by the board upon selection of successful bidders. Checks of successful bidders shall be held until delivery of the performance bond. At the time the bids are awarded, how long does the awarded bidder have to get the check or bid bond to us? What happens if they don't get it to us? Again, if it's actually the bid bond, that is required at the time of the bid itself. And that's, again, under IC 36-1-12-4.5A. So the political subdivision shall require a bond or a certified check to be filed with each bid by a bidder. Now, so of course that should occur before the bid is awarded. And again, the successful bidder's bid bond or certified check is held until the performance bond is delivered. If the bid bond is not provided at that time that bid is received, that would be considered not responsible. Remember, we talked yesterday about what a responsible bid is versus what a responsive bid. So that would fall under that category. The statute does not really state when performance bond is to be provided. So you will need to consult with your attorney about what is a reasonable time frame for them to be able to submit that. So. When someone is awarded a bid and issues a check instead of bid deposit, does this have to be certified check or can we accept a personal check? Again, if we're talking about the bid bond, that would be certified. If we're talking about for performance bond, which is found under IC 36-1-12-14E, it must either be a bond or if the contract is under $250,000, the board may waive the bond and accept an irrevocable letter of credit for an equivalent amount from the Indiana financial institution approved by the Department of Financial Institutions. So there is an exception that can be made with that. During a recent audit, I'm kind of almost dreading to hear those words anymore, we were instructed that EFT payments that the county makes are to be assigned a fictitious check number and posted to a fund that we are to newly create as a pass-through for electronic disbursements. This fund would then be included in the treasurer's cash book as well. Is this how we are required to keep track of EFTs? I shudder as an auditor to ever hear the word fictitious. Okay? Now, there might be something that you're working with your vendor on as far as accountability for EFT payments. So I'm not exactly sure. I think there's probably different ways that your vendors may be recommending that you treat that as far as making up a fund. I just really had a hard time trying to figure out exactly what you were told to do. So that person is in the room. I really appreciate getting a phone call or an email or something so that maybe we can make sure we're on the same page doing what we need to do. EFTs are accounted for. It's really a management decision on how that you're going to account for that. There must be a clear audit trail. The expenditures must go through all of the statutorily required approvals. They must be separately identifiable, and they must be properly supported by the claims. So what we're doing is just something that's electronic and that you're trying to keep record of in your system. So does anybody have any thoughts or anything on that example that they want to give? Okay. So, well, like I said, I'll be happy to talk with whoever was having concerns about that. Can federal reimbursements for highway grants and emergency management salaries be receipted to the fund that paid the expenses? Do they need to be reported on the SEPA? Yes, reimbursement should go back into the fund from which the expenditure was made. But there should have been a separate fund set up for that grant, and I realize most of you know that. You lose accountability and transparency by flowing grant activity through a fund like the general fund. That's why we want you to set up these separate grant funds. And I'll tell you, I know over at DOT, they are almost rabid about things being accountable like that. So something to keep in mind. Also, it makes it more difficult to even provide the activity that you'll need for the CFA report. And yes, those reimbursement items that are reimbursed that are federal, because sometimes you'll get a combination of federal and maybe some state funds or something, which should be identified on your remittance advices that you get, but the federal portion would go onto the CFA. Yes? First of all, when it comes to, if it's like a FEMA issue, but we're not talking FEMA, we're just talking, oh, okay. If we always say that you set up a separate grant fund, and we realize technically the way that this would work, and this is not what happens, and we don't take exception to the appropriation going into the red, so I'm going to say that all up front. Technically, you should set up a grant fund, you should loan money into it, go through the statute that provides for a loan into it, you would appropriate that money and expend it, then you would ask for reimbursement. That reimbursement would come back into that fund. You would pay back the fund that loaned the grant fund the money. But we don't go through all of that. What we have done is said we won't take exception if you set up a fund and you appropriate it and you end up going into the red and then you reimburse it with the monies that come in. If you pay out of another fund for salaries, like you're saying, which is not what we recommend that you do, but if you do that, then yes, you'd have to reimburse back to that fund the money. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Right, right, right. And so what you're talking about essentially is that you don't know how much reimbursement that you're going to receive on this kind of a grant. So you're expending money. And which grant is this? Okay. Okay. EMA and you said another? P. Okay. Okay. I've told you is what the process should be, but I'd like to know more about a grant that doesn't basically let you know what's going to get reimbursed. Because the whole idea of a reimbursement grant is they're saying to you, you spend this much money, this is what we will reimburse you for. And I get that there might be there might be a little bit that, oh, we don't know how much exactly of the salary because of this point system, but it shouldn't be to the point that it would be a material issue. But let me find out more about this particular grant and how it works, because I am not familiar with it. And then maybe I can come up with something that makes sense to do. No, you don't have to do that. So you should be able to kind of track that on different lines and identify it that way. Okay. Yes. Uh-huh.
They don't get it unless they meet certain qualifications. So we at the time we're paying them don't even know if we're going to get it.
Okay.
Pay it out of general fund.
Okay.
And then we put it in the grant fund, and then we reimburse the general fund, like that, do that, because we don't know if they're going to meet certain standards.
Okay. 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 That's very helpful. And okay. And I do understand that there might be times where you go into the red. I mean, with any grant, you never can be 100% sure that you're going to get complete reimbursement. Things can happen where you've expended money fully expecting that you're doing the right thing, and they turn around, it could happen, where they turn around and tell you, And then at that point in time, it's like you said, then you're going to have to reduce the appropriation out of that grant fund and increase it from where it really happened at. I mean, I have had that occur, and it has been with salary, not this particular one. It was an unusual occurrence. I never thought of it as being a way of doing business, okay? So that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. But any time that you don't get the reimbursement you're expecting, then obviously you're going to have to reduce that appropriation and increase that appropriation from where that fund was actually, or the money was actually expended. So anyway, okay, well, let me see what I can come up with, and I will send something general out. It will not be on the Q&A bulletin, I can guarantee you that, but I will get something sent out on that. What enforcement authority does the State Board of Accounts have in cases where there has been a theft? Does the Attorney General collect on the cases? All charge reports filed by the State Board of Accounts are referred to the Attorney General's Office for Enforcement and Collection. The Attorney General's Office has discretion to pursue collection and negotiate the settlement of the charges in the report. Additionally, we report to the prosecutor of the county, as well as work with various federal agencies. So things can come from many, many different angles. Are we still using the Big Bidders record book? Is there an SBOA approved form for this instead of the book? Well, that is the approved form, the 115. However, if you want to use something as an alternative, that is something that you're more than welcome to explore. The process is detailed in the April 2014 County Bulletin as far as how that forms are approved now. They no longer come to our office for approval. There's a process that we have in place. Do Operation Pullover federal grant salary payments need to be reflected in the payroll records and included in the salary ordinance? Should the OPO salaries be paid from the general fund and then be reimbursed, or should they be reflected in a separate fund? Does the separate OPO grant fund need to be appropriated? I think we've pretty well covered about the issues on that. But yes, the salary payments do need to be reflected in payroll records and included in the salary ordinance. That side isn't any different. The only time that there is an exception with that is with 4D incentive monies and the salary ordinance. That's the only time that there is an exception there. How do we handle a situation where the budget approved by the council was submitted in Gateway, but there were errors made in calculating salaries? May we unsubmit, resubmit the budget in Gateway? Well, of course, that's a DLGF question, and we will be forwarding it to them. There was something in the user guide that you may no longer edit a form once it's been submitted, but I am not going there, so we will forward that over to DLGF. Their phone number is 317-232-3777. I got a feeling most of you have that on speed dial, but anyway. However, one thing to remember, which is why I'm even talking about this instead of just forwarding it to them, is that the salary ordinance portion of it, it can be changed. It can be changed at any time, but remember that if this is involving an elected official, you'll need to get that changed before December 31st. Otherwise, that elected official is going to be locked into that salary. Vaccinations are paid for from the Health Department fund and subsequently reimbursed. Currently, the county is appropriating funding for the vaccines as the supply is diminished, doing additional appropriations. The reimbursements are believed to be coming from insurance, Medicare, and Medicaid, as well as from individuals. Can a separate non-reverting fund be established for the vaccines and collections? IC 16-20-1-27 talks about fees shall be accounted for and transferred to the health fund of the county. There was something tickling the back of my mind on this, and it was about 11 o'clock last night, and my notes were in the office, and so it seems like there was something else in regard to this. So I will have that in the Q&A if there was anything in addition to that IC code where you could do something like that, and it's still just tickling right back there. One presenter spoke about the different types of taxation, and during his presentation, he mentioned a levy freeze and then a thawing. What would cause a levy freeze? Ooh, that's so DLGF, which we will. I mean, I know my limitations, I'll tell you that much. So I will forward that on to them. Our brilliant resource center out there, though, they did come up with some answer to this. So if you want, I'll go ahead and read you what they kind of researched and found, but I will forward this to DLGF. Of course, DLGF approves all levies annually and would be able to answer that question in more detail. However, counties can adopt a COIT, CAGIT, and LOIT in order to shift tax revenue from property tax to income tax. This causes levy freezes. You will want to review IC 6-3.1-1.1, IC 6-3.5-6, and IC 6-3.5-7, and those are for the CAGIT and the COIT and CDIT. And also regarding property tax levy freezes exceptions for the CAGIT, which would be found under IC 6-3.5-1.1-24. So, when a taxpayer has appealed and has a hearing with the PDBOA, what is the required notice to the taxpayer when the hearing is set? The PDBOA shall by mail give notice of the date, time, and place fixed for the hearing to the taxpayer and the county or township official with whom the taxpayer filed the notice for review. And you find that under IC 6-1.1-15-1K. And the PDBOA shall give at least 30 days notice. How long does a taxpayer have to file an objection when a school advertises a capital project fund plan? And this was found under IC 20-46-6-13. And it's a remonstrance process, so that's where the statute. And we're on the home stretch here. These are the ones I got kind of too tired to type in. So, what is the interest percentage for tax refunds for pay 2014, and where can we look this percentage up? This is found on the Department of Revenue's website, and right now it is 3% for 2014, and they have the numbers out for 2015, and it still remains at 3%. What would be the correct procedure for increasing an appropriation on an account line for a Title IV-D incentive fund? We know this money does not need to be appropriated. However, the clerk pays part of a salary out of this fund and appropriates funds in each personal services pay line at the beginning of the budget year. One of the pay lines was under budget and is now showing in the red. There's plenty of money in cash because of the fund. Our procedure has always been to increase appropriation by additional. The clerk is refusing to sign the additional. We believe we need this authorization and paper trail in the auditor's office to change or move any appropriations. Well, the Title IV-D incentive does not need appropriation. if you're doing this as a tracking mechanism for some reason, then it's not, the clerk would need to be involved in the signing if it truly was an appropriation taking place. But if it's not, if it's kind of a mechanism for you and the county council just to be figuring out what you're doing for the salaries, then you would be able to do that in your system and go on with it. And if it's a question that it's not really necessary, that they just put that appropriation in, then you might want to be considering taking that appropriation out for that. I mean, it's kind of up to you, but it sounds like it's really, truly a management tracking thing that's going on there. Let's see. Oh. When I checked in at the hotel, I saw a number of county officials telling the person at check-in that they are Starwood preferred guests. Can we do that? Years ago, State Board of Accounts said we could not, once SBOA looked at my hotel bills to make sure I was not receiving points as a preferred guest on the county business. Well, I know we've talked many, many times about rewards and points and things like that, and whenever your county is paying for something, then it really is the county's property. And I'm sure that's why at that point in time somebody said, no, don't do that. I would also say that this is probably one of those cases where it's great to have an ethics policy in place in your county to address these kinds of things so that everybody knows where they stand, what people think is appropriate to do in your county and what's not appropriate to do. So I would say if you don't have an ethics policy, or if it's pretty general, that maybe these kinds of things be thought out and discussed in a public forum so that people, ethics, and I know Paul talked about this, and I think one of the best things that I've been hearing from this is that ethics, yes, we all have our ethics, and they all can vary. And there is a variance that's neither really right nor wrong. What you're concerned with are what are the ethics of your county, not necessarily your own personal ones. So that's something that I would strongly encourage you to do, or to start that discussion, though I'm sure it would be a painful discussion. And also, with these awards, things that kind of go on, I'd also be thinking about, well, what could I do for the county? Would they give, I'm not a Starwood's person or anything, but I don't know if there's something that could be done where it would go to the county so that maybe they get a free night somewhere at a Sheraton or something. So that's something to consider. Also, you might want to be considering how that maybe credit card usage, that a county credit card be used to get points back for the county itself. I know that was one thing that we had for our annual meeting where we have several people spending the night, and it actually literally saved us thousands of dollars. And so that's somebody's salary, that's supplies for your county. So those are some things to kind of keep in mind about that. If an office holder allows his or her employees a day off per week over and above any other county employee is allowed per county employee handbook, what is this considered? Ghost employment? In an audit, we would look to the policy for compliance and could find this as a potential exception. But any legal ramifications, and this is where I would be the most concerned I mean, again, I'll say this over and over again. Yes, State Board of Accounts, we come in, we audit, we look at compliance. It can be made part of a public report. But my biggest concern would be for that employee and any legal ramifications that could come against that person. So I'd consult my county attorney to make sure that that person isn't going to have some kind of potential criminal liability involved. Oh, this is a suggestion, and it's the last one. Eliminate all exemptions and deductions. I knew there'd be applause. It gets better. Remove circuit breaker amendment and return all taxpayers to original intent of constitutional rule of fair and equitable taxation. Stop dinking around. Well, you do have your ledge committee, so it would be nice, wouldn't it, if we could kind of all settle down just for a while, but we know that's probably not going to happen. So, and that's what makes you so good at your jobs, is because while we might secretly wish this, you take a deep breath, you look at the changes that are made, you go, okay, what do we need to do? Let's soldier on and do it. And I just so admire and appreciate that from you all. You should all be proud of yourselves that with limited resources, and you do have limited resources, that with all the changes that are made every year, and this is a long session, so we know there's going to be something that's changed, but that you do just take that deep breath and go on. So as a taxpayer, I so appreciate that out of all of you, so I want to give my personal thanks to you for that. I also, it is bittersweet right now because this is an election year, and there are many of you who are going to be leaving. And we thank you so much for all that you've done. I personally thank you for kind of growing me up and helping me. Thank you so much. I wish you nothing but the best. Enjoy your life out there, okay? For those of you who are going to have to suck it up and stick it out, thanks for that too. I look forward to working with each and every one of you. And just want to say that you are going to have the newbies coming along, and I know that you'll be there to help them too and give them that helping hand. So thank you for a great conference. You've all just been terrific, and I just wish you safe travels home. So thank you very much.